It's 1672, the Netherlands, and they're having what is quite possibly the worst year in Dutch history, which they literally called the disaster year, the Rampjaar. And when you're actually naming the year after how catastrophically bad it is, you know things are going spectacularly wrong. Like France is invading from the south, England's attacking from the sea, two German states, I think it's Munster and Cologne, but don't quote me on that, they're coming in from the east. It's like every major power in Europe just woke up one morning and said, you know what sounds fun? Let's all gang up on the Dutch at the exact same time. And the Dutch are just getting absolutely demolished. I mean, the French army under Louis XIV is tearing through their territory so fast that the Dutch have to do something completely insane. They open the dikes. They literally flood their own country, huge sections of it, just to create this water barrier to stop the French from marching straight into Amsterdam. It's called the Dutch Water Line. And it worked, but imagine being so desperate that you're drowning your own farmland to stop an invasion. That's the level of crisis we're talking about here. So who's running the country during all this? The De Witt brothers, Johan and Cornelis. And Johan de Witt, he's the Grand Pensionary, which is, okay, if not called Prime Minister because the Dutch Republic doesn't have a king or a traditional government structure like that. But he's essentially the guy in charge. He's been running the show for 20 years at this point. Him and his brother Cornelius, they're the leaders of the Republican faction. They believe in representative government, merchant power, no need for a monarch or a military strongman. Very progressive for the time, actually. Very Dutch. But, and this is important, there's another faction, the Orangists, supporters of the House of Orange. And specifically, they want William III, who's 21 years old at this point, to take power. And these people despise the De Witts, absolutely hate them. Because the De Witts have been keeping the Orange family sidelined for decades. No military positions, no political power, just kind of sitting there being rich and aristocratic, but not actually running anything. And now, with the country literally being invaded from 3 sides at once, the Orangists are see, this is what happens. This is what happens when you let merchants and Republicans run things instead of having a proper military leader. And honestly, they're not entirely wrong. I mean, the military situation is genuinely catastrophic. The Dutch army is getting crushed. The government's response has been kind of a disaster. People are terrified. So there's this building rage, right? This anger that's just simmering in the population. And the De Witts are right there, easy targets, the guys who've been in charge while everything went to hell. Now, in July 1672, Cornelius de Witt gets arrested. The charges are conspiracy to assassinate William of Orange, which is almost certainly bullshit. I mean, historians generally agree the charges were fabricated, but at this point, the political climate is so toxic that truth doesn't really matter anymore. He gets thrown in prison in The Hague, and this is where everything just goes completely off the rails. On August 20th, Johan goes to visit his brother in prison, and someone, probably multiple people in the Orange faction, has been working the crowd outside, getting them riled up, telling them the De Witts are traitors, that they sold out the country, that they're the reason everyone's suffering. And there's this mob forming, and they're angry, they're scared, they want blood. And here's the thing about mob psychology. Once it reaches a certain point, once enough people are together and they're all feeding off each other's fear and rage, rationality just completely disappears. Gone. Every bit of human decency and moral restraint just evaporates. So this mob storms the prison. They're probably being, tacitly encouraged by Orange supporters who know exactly what's going to happen, but aren't technically organizing it themselves. Plausible deniability, And they drag both brothers out, Johan and Cornelius, into the street. And what happens next is, okay, I'm just going to say it. It's one of the most brutal political murders in European history.
like genuinely horrifying. They beat them, they shoot them, they stab them. The brothers are killed, and that alone would be bad enough. That alone would be a tragedy, a politically motivated assassination. Terrible, but not, historically unique.
But that's not where it fucking stops. At all. Because after they're dead, after the DeWitt brothers have been murdered in the street, the mob starts mutilating the bodies. They're cutting them apart. And here's the part that makes this story so infamous, so uniquely disturbing. Multiple contemporary sources, these are people who were actually there, eyewitnesses, they describe members of the mob eating parts of the bodies. Specifically, they talk about people cutting out and consuming the brothers' organs. Hearts, livers. I've read accounts that mention other organs too, but does it matter which specific organs? The point is, they're eating them. Now, okay, there's some historical debate about exactly how widespread this was. Was it 2 people, 20 people, 100? Were they actually consuming the flesh, or was it more of a symbolic thing, some kind of ritualistic mutilation? And honestly, I don't think the specific numbers really change how disturbing this is. The fact that it happened at all, that even one person thought, you know what I'm going to do right now? I'm going to eat this guy's heart. That's enough. And it gets worse. It gets worse. There are accounts of people taking pieces of the bodies home, like souvenirs, trophies. There's this one story, I can't verify if it's true, but it's in multiple sources, about someone selling what they claimed was Johann DeWitt's finger. Just think about that for a second. Someone kept a human finger as a memento of a political murder. What was left of the bodies ended up being hanged upside down, put on public display in The Hague, because apparently the murder and the cannibalism wasn't humiliating enough. Now, you're probably wondering, where the hell was William of Orange during all this? Where was the guy who everyone wanted to lead the country? Great question. He was in The Hague. He was right there, and he did absolutely nothing to stop it. Now, his supporters will argue that he couldn't have stopped it, that the mob was too far gone, that trying to intervene would have been dangerous or futile. And maybe that's true, maybe, but it's also true that the DeWitts were his biggest political obstacles, and their deaths cleared the way for him to take complete control of the Republic. So, I'm not saying he ordered it. I'm not even saying he wanted it to happen this way. But I am saying that it was pretty convenient for him. And he definitely didn't lose any sleep over it. After the murders, William becomes stadtholder, basically the military dictator of the United Provinces. And actually, he's pretty good at it. He manages to reorganize the army, hold off the French, eventually push them back. The same republic that his family had been trying to dominate for decades, he actually saves it. So, mission accomplished, I guess. But here's what really gets me about this whole thing, the thing that just makes this story so darkly fascinating and horrifying at the same time. This wasn't some medieval atrocity. This wasn't like Vikings or Mongols or some ancient civilization we can write off as primitive and barbaric. This was 1672. This was the Dutch Golden Age. The Netherlands at this time was one of the most advanced societies on Earth. Amsterdam was a center of global trade, of art, of learning, of religious tolerance. This was Rembrandt's Netherlands, Vermeer's Netherlands, the place that basically invented modern capitalism and modern democracy. They had universities, they had philosophers, they had scientists. The Dutch Republic was where you went if you wanted intellectual freedom. It was cosmopolitan, sophisticated, cultured. And yet, when the pressure got high enough, when people got scared enough and angry enough, they murdered 2 government officials in the street and ate them.
They reduced politics to its most primal, savage form. And that's the thing about mob violence, right? It doesn't matter how civilized your society is. It doesn't matter how educated people are. Get enough frightened, angry people together, give them a target, and they'll do things. There's this painting by Jan de Baan. I think it was commissioned like right after, or maybe a few years later. I can't remember exactly, but it shows the bodies of the De Witt brothers hanging upside down with the mob around them. And it's just this horrific snapshot of collective insanity. And it's in a museum in Amsterdam now. You can go see it. This preserved moment of the day the Dutch Republic completely lost its mind. And here's the really wild thing. Within like 20 years, the same people who did this, or their kids at least, were celebrating William of Orange as he sailed to England to take the throne in the Glorious Revolution. He went from being the guy whose supporters literally ate his political opponents to being one of England's most celebrated monarchs, one of the architects of constitutional monarchy, a champion of Protestant liberty. History just kind of moved on and decided not to dwell on the whole cannibalism thing. And look, I'm not saying the De Witts were perfect. They weren't. They made political mistakes. Their foreign policy was arguably too passive. They definitely underestimated the military threat from France. Johan de Witt himself admitted in his later correspondence that he'd misjudged the situation. But even if they were the worst politicians in Dutch history, which they weren't, not even close, what happened to them was so far beyond any reasonable form of justice or accountability that it just makes you question everything about human nature. Because here's the uncomfortable truth that this story forces us to confront. We like to think we're past this kind of thing, right? We like to believe that we've evolved, that we're more rational now, that the age of lynch mobs and political cannibalism is safely behind us. We've got human rights, rule of law, democratic institutions, all these safeguards.
But the psychological mechanisms that led to what happened in The Hague in 1672, the fear, the tribalism, the need for scapegoats, the intoxication of being part of a mob with the power to do whatever it wants, all of that is still in us. It's still in every human society. We've just built better guardrails, better systems to prevent it from happening, most of the time. And that's what keeps me up at night sometimes, when I see political rhetoric getting more extreme, when I see mobs forming, whether in the streets or online, when I see people dehumanizing their opponents, reducing them to caricatures, treating political disagreement as existential warfare. I think about the Dutch Republic in 1672. I think about how quickly it went from enlightened governance to cannibalism. It only took a few months of crisis, a few months of fear and invasion and economic pressure, and one of the most civilized societies on earth was tearing people apart in the street. How many disasters are we from our own Ramyar? How many bad years before our guardrails fail? Maybe we really have changed. Maybe the institutions we've built are stronger than what the Dutch had. But the De Witt brothers probably thought their institutions were pretty strong too, right up until the mob dragged them out of that prison.